On August the 4th, 1914, Britain declared war on Germany. During the early months, it was a mobile war with each side trying to outflank the other. Germany had recognised the strategic value of the railways after the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. In 1914, the primary means of transporting millions of tons of equipment, hundreds of thousands of troops, and the paraphernalia of war was the railways. Indeed, the reason for many of the major battles was to capture vital railheads. They were so important that World War I was dubbed the Railway War. These supply lines became primary targets, especially during the Second World War. The aeroplane had become a much more sophisticated weapon of war. Just one aircraft was capable of destroying a steam engine with its machine guns, and later on with its cannons. With the build-up to D-Day in 1944, the German and French railway systems were strafed and bombed by the RAF and the USAF, almost into submission. Germany then had the problem of building more locos to keep supplies moving. German factory workers had the disheartening job of building new engines round the clock, knowing that just like tanks and aircraft, they would probably last only a few days. More importantly, German workers had to be taken from other vital industries just to keep up with the devastation from the air. Germany's Führer, Adolf Hitler, let his hatred of communism cloud his judgment when he attacked his ally, Russia, in Operation Barbarossa during 1941. Again, the railways were a fundamental method of supply. But Hitler underestimated both the Russian winter and the determination of the Russians themselves, who used every method to repel the Nazi invasion of their vast country. During the siege of Leningrad in 1941, the Russians laid track on the ice over Lake Ladoga to bring in food and much-needed medical supplies to the beleaguered city. The railway not only brought in supplies, but also played an effective role in taking casualties, the sick women and the half-frozen children out of Leningrad, across the lake and away from the areas of most danger. In Europe, another method of destroying the railways was through sabotage, particularly by the French resistance aided by the British Special Operations Executive, or SOE, supplying secret agents and hardware behind German lines. Historian Anthony Kemp explains how it was done.
This would have been an absolutely ideal place for blowing a railway. We're in a cutting, which helps to compress the effect of any explosion very nicely. Now, the technique was that you dug out some of the stones right underneath the rail, and you popped in a piece of plastic explosive about the size of a cigarette packet, stuffed that underneath, put the stones back, made sure it was all well tamped down, ran a piece of Cortex fuse up the bank, and it could then be detonated at will by a simple plunger switch. But even better was to put a small pressure switch actually on top of the railway line itself, because if you were very, very lucky then, you would actually get a locomotive. Now, another favourite, why this site is so good, is behind me is a bridge. Now, if at the same time as blowing the track, you can actually drop the bridge on top of it, it's going to take the enemy a hell of a lot longer to repair it. And on a piece of track like this, you've got a curve, much more difficult and more expensive to replace. Nowadays, the lines are all welded, they're all continuous strip. But of course, during the war, the rails were in sections. So the favourite place to actually put the explosive was where there was a join between two rails and a fish plate bolting them together.
Another method was to bomb specific targets such as viaducts on the main lines to Germany's industrial heartland.
And here is the result. Although not a direct hit, many yards of the viaduct have been destroyed.
Britain even managed to supply Russia using the antiquated Persian railway system that was all but rebuilt by the Royal Engineers. Oil and supplies were transported from the refineries near Abadan in the south, over mountains and desert to the Caspian Sea in the north. The trains had to carry their own water supply in the ferocious heat. As the war progressed, the efficient Germans found that keeping supply lines open was getting more and more impossible as the Allied bombs rained down. Repairing damaged lines, viaducts and bridges fell to the German TOT organisation, which had built the Atlantic Wall and underground factories. Against massive odds, these engineers were well suited to keeping the railway systems moving. During the evacuation of Dunkirk in the first year of the war, when 338,226 men were forced to retreat over the Channel from northern France, the Southern Railway helped in the rescue operation by supplying some of their steamer fleet in the massive exodus. A total of 861 ships of all shapes and sizes were used in the evacuation. Southampton and its docks were continually bombed during the early phase of the war, partly because the Supermarine factory manufacturing Britain's frontline fighter, the Spitfire, presented a worthwhile target to the Luftwaffe. In 1940, the British believed that the Germans were capable of deliberately bombing bridges over the Thames. In fact, the railways presented relatively small targets to German bombers. Night bombing, as in the Blitz, was a hit-and-miss affair, but Southwark Street Bridge was hit during London's worst raid when the Luftwaffe dropped 890 tons of high explosive. Nearly every line into London was affected to some extent, but the damage to this bridge was probably the most serious. It was tantamount to severing Blackfriars Railway Bridge, which carried the principal link between the lines in North London and the Southern Railway. This kind of damage took more than a few days to repair, but temporary structures were rapidly put up and the bridge was used again 2 weeks after the incident. The decimation of the carriage sheds at Clapham Junction was the work of a lucky stick of high explosive that fell in the early hours of the 8th of September 1940, during the first major raid of the London Blitz. Considering that the Germans were aiming for Docklands, these bombs were some 7 miles off target. Six carriage roads were put out of action, and about a dozen coaches either destroyed or damaged. There was indeed quite a mess to clear up. But the Southern Railway network was so complex and interconnected that there were usually alternative routes left for the commuters to travel on. It was on the dreadful nights of the 16th of April and the 10th of May in 1941 that nearly every London terminus was put out of action. On the Southern, this was as much the result of the interruption of the power supply needed for traction and signalling as to damage to the track or structures, so it was easily rectified. But the demolition of the offices at Waterloo and the footbridge to the Eastern Section station were quite another matter, as the damage was extensive. Unfortunately, many of the people who were sheltering in the arches under the station lost their lives. Waterloo was the biggest terminus of the lot and was struck about 35 times during the war. So was the 8-track stretch of 4.5 miles to Clapham Junction, built mostly on viaducts. Waterloo was out of use on a number of occasions, sometimes for 3 or 4 days. When the very modern automatic signalling was put out of action, the trains were run by hand signalling using flags. The Necropolis station was also badly damaged. In peacetime it was used for funeral trains bound for Brookwood Cemetery. It too was eventually repaired. The severe damage to Paddington Station occurred in March 1944, during the Little Blitz. It was caused by a large bomb which fell on platforms 6 and 7. Incredibly, trains and their passengers came and went, apparently oblivious to the drama of the situation. A clear example of carry on regardless. Unlike the Southern Railway termini, Paddington was a large enough station to keep on operating after quite heavy damage, and was never put out of action for more than a few hours. Damage to a great arch of the roof and the replacement of the damaged platform tracks was very labour intensive, so the railwaymen were helped by soldiers who would probably use this training for later work on the continent. In order to keep the railways running at all, the railwaymen had to be flexible. They had to be able to reroute the trains, sometimes at a moment's notice.
London's first trains, they never fail to get out. One night, incident, Blackfriars. Blackfriars box informed control that the Ramsgate paper train couldn't get out for bomb damage. Divert it to Cannon Street. Repeat, divert it. Until... Incident, Cannon Street. So the Cannon Street inspector informed control that the Ramsgate paper train couldn't leave from there. The line was blocked. Divert to London Bridge. Send loading car and papers. Send them to London Bridge. But suddenly, incident, London Bridge. London Bridge was bombed. All lines of communication were blocked. The paper train would not be leaving from London Bridge in a hurry. Divert the papers. The Ramsgate paper train will now leave from Victoria. It'll be late. Advise the newspapers. Train left about 4 hours late, but it got out, leaving behind scenes such as these. but even then, it wasn't out of danger. Honest news keeps us all aware of the war's latest developments, while false dispatches make Nazi propaganda seem ludicrous. Accurate, objective newspapers will help us all to play our part in sharing the benefits of the better world we can and must obtain.
Hello, Ray. How are you?
Hello, Chris.
Remember that news train story of yours?
Sure. Have a cigarette.
Just been telling it to a friend of mine. Got a match?
Yeah, sure.
What's this? Well, I'll be damned.
In Britain, the railway's dedicated workers had to be trained as Home Guard units. In other words, they had to become part of the military. With America's late entry into the war, it was time to catch up with Europe. It had the huge task of enlisting a large number of railwaymen into its army.
The most gigantic military railroad program in history focuses new interest on Camp Claiborne, pride of the Army Transportation Corps. Railroad operating battalions are trained for the major function of keeping the Iron Horse rolling in overseas theaters of operations. It's part of the long-range plan to solve the vital problem of transporting troops and supplies in pace with the fast-moving Allied offensives on world battlefronts. The activities of these soldiers of the railroad may be partially overlooked. You might even put them into the classification of unsung heroes. But by any name, you're sure to meet up with them somewhere, helping you and your equipment to reach their assigned destinations, safely and in a hurry. Trained to their particular jobs, just as you're trained to handle the gun, the tank, or jeep, they have been made to be ready for real assignments, and they can be found where the fire of battle is at a white heat. For an effective illustration, we move to the North African battle scene, where Army railroad workers wrote heroic chapters during the hectic 6-month campaign. Locomotives and rolling stock had to be serviced 24 hours a day. Strategic rail sections destroyed by the enemy had to be rebuilt almost overnight. Lines to Tunis and Bizerte had to be opened and operated. The logistics of the campaign put extra heavy emphasis on railway links. The assignment was overwhelming. The time was short, but the men of the railroad battalions knew their jobs. Equipment long lacking proper maintenance was given new efficiency. Military railroad traffic at the front increased in carload tonnage. And when the Allied commanders took final accounting of the contributing factors to victory in North Africa, the railroad troops were not forgotten. At this point, the training of these men should again be mentioned. Railroad operating battalions for every front, drilled in the manner to be illustrated in the balance of this film. We've returned to Camp Claiborne, and are following the soldier railroad students into the classrooms where the fundamentals of railroad work are expounded. Telegraphy is always essential. The teaching method includes the sending of messages by the instructor, which the students receive by ear and then record on paper. Officers at Camp Claiborne are experienced railroad men, recruited from the nation's major railroads. Actual railroad experience is also looked for among enlisted personnel, with many old-timers in the ranks. Now, an interesting training feature, the step-by-step procedure of getting an Army railroad line into action. First, the chief dispatcher prepares the order for the makeup of a train, as required by the particular situation. A copy of the order is passed on to the dispatcher, whose responsibility it is to call the orderly room for the necessary train crew. In quick order, the men are on their way. The yard master gives orders to the yard foreman for making up the special train. The yard engine the foreman is starting off will be utilized for the purpose of building up the train, beginning with the caboose. Now the job is for the switchman to close the siding from which the engine picked up the caboose and open the siding on which the train will be built up. And before long, the train is completely built up. Each car will serve a definite purpose. They detach the yard engine, and Mr. Iron Horse himself proudly struts out of the roundhouse. The coupling of the engine to the completed train is the next step. Ready to roll. But first, there are a few details. The conductor checks his watch against the master clock in the yardmaster's office and signs the outgoing train register. Then he receives his orders. The engineer also gets the orders. Meanwhile, the rear brakeman climbs aboard the caboose and hangs out the rear lamp. All hands now wear helmets, gas masks, and pistols. All aboard! The military railroad at Camp Claiborne in operation. The line itself is a 50-mile run between Claiborne and Camp Hope. Government-built, owned, and operated, it was originally designed for the sole purpose of training railroad operating battalions. However, it has since served as a valuable transportation link between the two camps for the movement of troops and supplies. The trains make daily runs, maintaining the same schedules as private railroads. Along the line, the train makes a water stop. Every operation of the Army Railroad has been worked out to take the minimum amount of time. There are 8 stations between Claiborne and Polk, and the telegraph operators deliver orders on the run to the engineer and the conductor. Following the policy of advanced unit training, the Army Transportation Corps conducts training under mock combat conditions. For this demonstration, the officers plot a simulated attack on the train to hold up its movement. All the drama of the real thing is staged as the 0 hour for the bombing arrives. The train has provided for its security with armed and alert guards at their posts. This is important training too. The planes attack. Again and again bombs fall. And for the purposes of the training procedure being illustrated, the main damage is to the track road bed. The damaged tracks are inspected by engineer, firemen, and brakemen, and quickly the task of accomplishing rapid repair begins. The brakeman signals to the caboose, prearranged cues for trained specialists to spring into action. Receiving the brakeman's information, the conductor and the signalman prepare to make contact with the dispatcher's office at Claiborne. Even while the signalman gets going, the soldiers responsible for the security of the train are moving to various vantage points. They'll offer protection during the repair operations. Their training tells them just what positions to take, with proper cover always foremost. The signalman, meanwhile, goes up the pole to make a connection on an open wire telephone line. The call goes through. Signalman to the Claiborne operator, to the dispatcher, and finally to the first sergeant who calls out the wrecker crew. They come on the double, riflemen with full pack. Others load railroad ties. There are two classes of repair crews. One that goes out whenever possible by motor truck overland to the scene of the wreck. Prime movers and trailers leave the camp loaded with bulldozers. The other repair crew goes out in railroad motor cars. And here the section crew is getting ready to leave. All the lessons of classroom and railroad yard will now serve them well. The trucks are first to arrive at the scene, and there's a rush job of unloading. The bulldozer is important, for every effort is made to minimize the use of manual labor. The crew removes the broken ties and the bulldozer follows, filling in the crater. They have the job pretty well done by the time the section crew arrives. The ties are laid, completing the road bed. Then come the rails. Teamwork. All swing together to put the rail in its proper place. The angle bar bolts get final tightening. Then the last spikes are driven in. Every task reduced to just so many minutes. The engine is already rolling, anxious to get up to full speed again. And you've seen how the railroad operating battalions would function under any kind of conditions. Camp Claiborne is turning them out for the Army Transportation Corps to assure no hitch in the movement and maintenance of military railroads. Railroads and railroad men have played a major role in the development of our country. Today they're doing a frontline war job, and the trains must be kept moving.
Another problem for the railways is natural damage. Landslips can be a hazard both in peace and war. They are usually caused by unusually heavy rain or rapidly thawing snow. When the cutting is made through chalk, it is similar to solid rock, so cost can be minimized by making the sides steeper than through the soft earth. But chalk is capable of being softened by water and split by frost, like any rock. The stretch of the Southern Region main line between Folkestone and Dover runs close to the sea through a succession of tunnels and under steep chalk cliffs. Minor chalk falls are very frequent, but during each of the World Wars, enormous falls of chalk happened on this stretch of line. In December 1915, the fall was so great that the line had to be closed for the rest of the war. The same thing happened on the 28th of November 1939. But at 20,000 tons, it was not as bad as the 1915 incident. Because of the blackout, clearance had to be done during the short winter daylight hours, so the clearing up operation was not finished until January 1940. It's said that the British nation is at its best when its back is against the wall. Nowhere was this demonstrated more fully than on the railways, as this classic piece of film shows.
In the goods marshalling yard where I work, we shunt the trucks as they come in up to the top of a hump. We chalk a number on each truck to show which of the 20 roads is to go into. Then we uncouple it and let it roll down. Thousands of goods wagons a day are sorted like this, to and from all parts of the country, carrying everything from eggs to ammunition. My name's Joe Black. I'm what's called a wagon chaser. That is, I brake the trucks on the run so that when they arrive out on the road, they don't smack up too hard behind the others. It's pretty hard work, but it's all right when you get the knack of it, and it keeps you on your toes. The day the incident I'm going to tell you about happened, I threw over the stick to Jimmy Coxon on West Hump at the end of an afternoon shift. I live near the yard, moved out there when I got married so as to be on top of the job. I cycled to and from work, so it wasn't long before I was home and ready to forget about shunting for another 12 hours or so. Well, that's what I thought. After supper, I was smoking a last pipe out in the front. It was a perfect night for an air raid, and an alert had gone early, but the marshalling yard does a 24-hour-a-day job and carried on as usual. Charlie Simmons was taking down wagon numbers on Road 15 when the trouble started. A couple of 100 acres of marshalling yard, and incendiaries and HEs began to fall in so many different parts that every man around was kept busy. To make matters worse, the mains supplying the hydrants were hit, and in some parts of the yard there was no water pressure. Over on the west side, Charlie and his mate grabbed buckets and stirrup pumps and tackled their fire. They knew they had to do something quickly, because it was a fast-burning load of wheat. But when they ran up to it, they got the shock of their lives. They daren't leave that wheat truck to fetch help. The flames had to be kept down, away from the next truck. It was those flames I saw from my home. I nipped on my bike and made hell for leather for where the flames were. Meanwhile, Charlie and George were working like mad with the pumps.
Hello, Joe. We're trying to keep it away from the ammunition.
We must shunt them apart. I'll get an engine.
Keep pumping.
The loco shed is across the main line. It seemed miles away that night, but I got there and managed to collect an engine and a crew. Give me the mainline signal box.
Mainline signal box speaking.
Hello, Harry. Listen, I've got an urgent shunt to make across to number 10.
Okay, Joe. Take number 3 across the main down the west siding and back into number 10. And I wish you the best of luck.
Right, let's go. If Joe doesn't get here soon, this lot's going sky high.
Well, I've made a few footplate rides in my life, but never one that seemed as long as it was that night. We fair burned across those tracks, but all the time I had that other fire in mind, and the things dropping around it. Harry up in the box had to stay put. He always has to. And he cleared the roads for a straight run across. Charlie and George were pumping their guts out. They were fighting a losing battle, and the flames and sparks were getting nearer and nearer the ammunition truck. A minute before we arrived, the worst happened. The ammunition truck caught. We backed the engine in as gently as we could. We didn't want to disturb anything.
Hurry up!
And were Charlie and George glad to see us.
The ammunition truck's alive.
I shinned up to see what I could do.
Here, where's your tin hat?
Home, I left an hurry, you mutt.
Take mine, you may need it.
Oh, all right. As the truck had only just caught, I thought I might be able to stop it. But directly I got up there, I saw it was hopeless. Pull her under the water spout! Right.
If she goes up now, he's a goner.
I was taking a chance on that water spout being okay. The water columns are fed from a different main to the hydrants, but had that been damaged by bombs too? That's what we didn't know. And that fire was beginning to get a hold.
Come on, hurry up!
Coming!
More this way!
Okay.
Right! Turn her on!
Our luck was in. Blimey, I'd never been so glad to see water in all my life. In a few seconds, we doused her down until there wasn't a fizzle left. And a lot of people round about felt more comfortable. When I'd made sure the ammunition trucks was quite safe, I went to see how Charlie and George were getting on. Next day, the marshalling yard was working as usual. We've got to get the trucks through whatever happens. You may grumble a bit when there's a delay, but don't worry. A little thing like a blitz doesn't hold up a marshalling yard for long.
That dedication is not forgotten today, as many of the preserved lines have their steam war weekends. This one is on the Great Central Railway, near Leicester.
Good morning. We are on the Great Central Railway in Leicestershire, which consists of 4 stations, and we are involved in a war weekend to commemorate World War II. Loughborough, which is the principal station, is going to be staffed by the Home Guard today. Corn Station, this is really the centre of operations. We have a military fair, a lot of military personnel about, possibly 50-60 military vehicles will be down the bottom side of the site. And then we go through to Rothley, which is across the Swithburn Reservoir, and that is the English Channel for today's activities, and Rothley will become a German station entirely. Yeah, I could imagine that all the troops came in through Quorn and were billeted in various parts of Charnwood Forest. They were sitting there obviously waiting for D-Day and afterwards ready to be dispatched down the south, and possibly a lot of them never came back. That was just the sadness of war. Hopefully this will react with the public. They will see the benefits of life today compared to what it used to be in those dreadful days of wartime.
But the realism of actual war was very different. In Leicestershire during the D-Day build-up, American tanks were frequently transported from their depots on wagons down to the south coast. In the south, the Romney, Hythe and Dymchurch Railway was commandeered by Colonel Beath, who had this light armoured train made up in 1940. The engine and wagons were protected by mild steel plate and concrete. Each wagon was equipped with 2 Lewis machine guns and a Boy's anti-tank rifle. The train was never used in anger. An even rarer sight was the rail-mounted gun, which had to be very carefully set up, as it could only be fired more or less in line with the railway. If it was fired at a right angle, it was in great danger of becoming unbalanced with the recoil. These guns were a cross between a fixed gun and a field gun, but they were not found to be particularly useful. The British and Germans would fire the occasional salvo across the channel, but the guns were found to be vulnerable because they were difficult to move quickly. On Monday, May the 7th, 1945, the war in Europe came to an end with Germany's unconditional surrender. But the railway still had a massive job to do throughout the continent. Huge amounts of war material had to be moved. Men and women of all nations had to be repatriated, and supplies of food, coal and the basic essentials of life had to be transported on the railway networks. The efficient operation of the railways in the United Kingdom was absolutely vital to the survival of Britain and the eventual defeat of Germany. This all depended on the skill and dedication of the railwaymen, all 625,000 of them. We must not forget that 395 British railway staff were killed and 2,444 seriously injured by enemy action while they were on duty. Honours conferred on railway personnel included 3 George Crosses, 29 George Medals, 6 Orders of the British Empire and 83 British Empire Medals, a fitting epitaph to the frontline service of railway staff. After Germany's defeat, the awful reality of what part of its railway system had been used for stunned a now peaceful world. It's only right that we never forget the dark days of war when the railways played such a vital role.
Later on today, we will be bringing in troops evacuated from the breaches as it was in 1944, a month after D-Day. We'll see German prisoners of war and the wounded coming back from the beaches. The idea is to create the theme for the local community and create the evacuation train with the local schools as part of the curriculum that's being taught now to bring it back to life. In that way, we're hoping that the schools will take on the history side of it and start bringing in the life itself with ID cards, the food, the air raids, and generally the whole picture for a child back in 1944.
Intelligence? Yes. See, he's got what he seems, I don't think. Troublemaker. What about this one? I am what I am. Do you reckon he is what he is or not? Yeah. Has he got a tattoo? Right, we'll all get a shall we board then now? All the guns in there? Yeah, I think. Well, what's that? A Messer.
These reenactments were played out on Alresford Station on the Midhants Watercress line. Moving westwards to the South Devon Railway, the reenactments have an altogether more battleground feel.
It's sort of a wartime weekend around the railway, personnel, if you like, in various periods of dress. The main period, I suppose, is the 39-45 war. There's going to be some vehicles quite on, some little convoys. Various people are going to be riding up and down on the trains. Gives a nice atmosphere if you've got a carriage, sort of an old wartime period carriage. Then we're doing a road run down to Totnes Station. It's going to be a mock battle down there. Basically, we've got some Germans who are holding a pillbox, which just happens to be in the middle of a field near a railway station. They're going to be attacked by a motley crew of Americans and British, mostly in jeeps. The artillery are going to come in and back it up a little bit. Germans will probably try some devious underhanded tricks and try and sneak around the back. We've got a couple of ambulances ready to cart off the casualties. Fire! It's the first time we will have used the 25 pounder here, which will give us a little bit of extra firepower perhaps. There is a serious reason behind it, because we collect items from a very serious period of time. We're collecting items, most of us, from the Second World War period, which was a very serious period of time. This time the railway have actually provided us with a train of our own, with some military vehicles that will be travelling up and down, camouflaged up, fairly well defended with machine guns, etc. First time we've had an actual train to ourselves, so it's that's a new one. The railway have actually provided us with our own train. All of us are members of the Military Vehicle Trust, which is a national club, and we've got areas. This is the Devon and Cornwall area. There's branches right throughout the country. We're about 3,000 nationally now. Club has sort of been going, just had its 30th birthday.
Okay, this is Errol Lonsdale, 060 Hunslet Austerity. It's based on the original London North Eastern Railway J94 class. It was built in 1953 at the Hunslet Engine Works in Leeds. The locomotive was only named Errol Lonsdale after the commanding officer in about 1969, just before the facility at Longmoor closed. But it was used to train sappers for the operation of militaries under wartime conditions. It appeared in several films. It appeared in the Rerouting Train robbery, which was filmed in the 1950s with Frankie Howard and co. And also appeared in the film Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
After 64 years of service in the British Army, the steam locomotives of the Longmoor Military Railway in Hampshire bustle about their business for the last time. The railway's closing, and the locomotives Gordon and Errol Lonsdale prepare to work the last two trains with a special ceremony at Longmoor Station to mark the disbandment of the 8th Railway Squadron of the Royal Corps of Transport. Present and former officers of the Railway Squadron, which until 1965 was part of the Royal Engineers, gather round the footplate to reminisce, and one senior officer isn't missing what's perhaps his last chance to drive a steam locomotive.
Want to be back on time? Yes, we want to be more honorarium.
Without the attraction of a ride behind steam, the crowd ranged neatly on the public stand to see the last train go is a small one, compared with those of popular public open days of previous years, when the depleted coaching stock could hardly cope with the demand for free rides on a steam train. Especially the last 18 months at Longmoor, when all British Railways steam had gone. Longmoor also played host to the two preserved Southern Pacifics and David Shepherd's engine, an added attraction at open days. The southern terminus of the line is at Lith, the junction with the Portsmouth line of British Railways, where passengers change onto trains for Longmoor. Until the line was closed, there were daily passenger trains for Army staff on the Lith to Longmoor section. But rarely were they so full as on this typical open day, when Gordon's train of vintage coaches is packed out, right up to the birdcage of the southeastern coach bringing up the rear. The locomotive Gordon is a former Ministry of Supply 210, built by North British in 1943. Many of these engines entered service with the LNER after the war and survived with British Railways until the early 60s. But Gordon worked on in military service, stationed at Longmoor from 1957 onward. Longmoor's heyday was during the Second World War, when manpower rose from 500 in 1939 to over 2,000 in 1942. 27,000 Army railwaymen were trained here each year, and in 1944 the traffic exchange with Southern Railway reached a peak of 602,000 tons. Longmoor once saw 27 locomotives in steam at the same time, and 7,600 passengers carried in one day. Number 196, L. Lonsdale, was the last of a large stud of Ministry of Supply shunting engines based at Longmoor. Built at Landslips in Leeds in 1953 as a variation of the standard steel works shunter, many of these locomotives were later sold to the LNER, which classified them as J94. They survived almost to the end of steam on British Railways. The last ones worked on the Cromford and High Peak Railway in Derbyshire. A fine example has been preserved in working order at the Quainton Road Railway Museum in Buckinghamshire. At Miss Forest, in the heart of the Hampshire Downs, Gordon pauses for the benefit of a typical open-day crowd of enthusiasts and photographers. And after getting the right-of-way, steams off towards Longmoor on one of her last passenger duties before the closing ceremony. On October the 31st, 1969, a Guard of Honour of No. 8 Squadron, the Royal Corps of Transport, parades for the last time. This was one of the oldest units of the Corps. It was formed in 1806 as a company of the Corps of Military Artificers in the Channel Islands. It was reformed as No. 8 Railway Squadron Royal Engineers. It operated railways in the Crimea and came under General Gordon's command in the China War. The unit trained on the London, Chatham and Dover Railway and later became part of General Wolseley's expeditionary force to Egypt. It came to Longmoor in 1905 and built the Woolmer Instructional Railway from Borden Camp down to Lith. As Gordon pulls away, L. Lonsdale begins her last journey from the other end of the platform, taking official guests on the run to Miss Forest and back. After running round at Oakhanger, Gordon now makes her way back to Longmoor for the last time. Errol Lonsdale, too, makes a final run past. Now it's all over. Gordon and Lonsdale shunt their carriages to rest for the last time. One of the final chapters of the Age of Steam is ended.